everything was just bad. And you know what happened? This woman, her name's Rosemary. Rosemary did something that changed me forever. She allowed herself to be a vessel for the ministering of the Holy Spirit to me. Through her, I came out of my depression. And when I got to college, I said, all right, what do I do? I want to be a writer. And Mom said, Todd, you're not going to make money. Okay, all right. Okay, well, let me look at that. Sure enough, wasn't going to make any money being a writer. So I thought, okay, well, I got to be able to support myself because I can't live off my parents all the time. And sure enough, prayed about it, and I remembered Rosemary. And I remembered the compassion she gave me. I remembered the understanding she gave me. I remembered the fact that I would call her late at night, just completely stressed out, and she'd say, with the calmest of spirits, okay, we're going to pray, and then I'll meet you tomorrow, and we'll talk about this. And through the Holy Spirit guiding her, she brought me back from the brink, and I thought to myself when I got to college, I need to pay her back. And so I decided to go into psychology, and that was probably the most influential person. I would say Rosemary and the Holy Spirit. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thanks for coming. It's very kind of you to come and listen to us talk. In thinking about this question, I was thinking about how God's plan isn't always apparent to us. And I am the son of a road builder. He was the son of a road builder, so I naturally decided not to go into road building. If anything I didn't want to do, it was that. I went into journalism, and partly because I had an uncle who was a journalist, and I got to know him. He never encouraged me or discouraged me, but I just saw what he did. He had a fascinating life. So I went into journalism, and yet, as it came around, and I worked for years for other papers, I finally ran out of people who were willing to hire me. I decided I better start my own business because then I can at least have some say in whether I work for myself. And my dad had his own road building company, and his dad did. So in a very real way, I realized later that he did influence me. His rule was, do whatever you want to do with your life, but do it well. And he said there's no job that's beneath you. Some people would say journalism falls into that category. But I run my own business now, and I have a dual role. I'm the businessman who runs the business, but I'm also the editor, which is a professional capacity. And my father is an engineer and ran his own company, so I followed in his steps, I suppose, in a way. I didn't realize it till much later. And it was really neat how God's plan worked out, at least it has so far for me.
Thank you. Pastor Browner?
Thanks, Wynn. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you folks today. As the resident man of the cloth here, I guess I should give the spiritual answer that my colleagues down the way have given, and I totally agree with that. It is ultimately God who directs all things in our life, and I'm thankful for that. But as a human instrument, as you've heard others recognize, my father was a furniture manufacturer, and I didn't have a desire to follow in that. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I didn't. I didn't. He was very non-directive. He was one of those dads that laid off and said, you got to find your own course. I'll support you. He was very supportive, but he was not directive. So, in my life, shortly after I became a Christian, what began to arrest me and really grab me was the realization I had these ideas of what Christians were. I thought, goody two-shoes, people that didn't do this and didn't do that, and then they were real tame and real kind of a little bit on the particularly, and it just didn't have a lot of attraction to me. I always believed in the fundamentals of Christianity. I believed in the things that it claimed, but I didn't see a lot of Christians that impressed me until in my high school years. And when I came to a personal relationship with Christ, I began to notice there were a bunch of guys that just didn't fit the stereotype. They were actually guys that really enjoyed life. It seemed to be fun. They were quite outgoing. Many of them were very athletic. They were very strong in their personalities and very confident in their walk with God. They lived a life that I really admired. And I started watching some of these guys, and I began to listen to them and began to rub shoulders with them and get involved with them. And I watched some of these guys and the life they lived and the way they were seeing themselves as being on a mission from God. And they were willing to take risks in their life. They were willing to reach out to people that were different than themselves. I was being accepted not because of what I did, but because of the relationship I had with Christ. And that began to powerfully influence me. And I watched these young men that were 2 or 3 years older than me. And I just began to kind of track them for several years, and I watched their lives. And they kept all ending up in something called a seminary after they graduated from college. And I watched them pursue a ministerial track and to become pastors and missionaries. And that was probably the most formative influence, that group of guys that were just very different than any other guys I'd been around, but I knew they were living for something more. And that was probably the greatest single influence that moved me toward my vocational choice of being a minister of the gospel.
The second question is, what role have mentors played in your life as you sought to develop spiritually and as a leader in your respective business? Since we ended with you, Joe, why don't we go ahead and begin with you and work back down the table in the other direction?
Okay. Yeah. Caught me on that one, didn't you? Wow. I had time to gauge off with these guys down there, jump in the water. Mentor-wise, I would say, again, guess what? Surprise, surprise, it was a pastor. But this time not a young man that was moving those directions, not other guys were moving a little bit ahead of me, but one who was already in the pastorate. It was probably the pastor of my church that I ended up becoming a member of there, out of the Campus Crusade for Christ background that I had been converted through. It was my pastor in the Presbyterian church there, but it was also another pastor on the other side of town that probably was my closest mentor. And he was God that just opened his life to me, just began to invite me into his life, took me places with him. He'd take me out to lunch. He would take me skiing with him, and I love water skiing, and that was one of my great passions. I loved any kind of crazy, anything wild in sports, I loved it. And he knew that, and he had a real fast boat, and he would take me skiing. Now, he made me scrub it, and he made me wax it, and he made me wash it, and all those other things, but so he taught me something there, too. There was no free lunch. But he continually invested his life in me. He would have me over. We would do studies together. We'd work through books together. I could come over to Tom's house and say, Tom, I'm really confused about this. I don't get it. You know, somebody I ran into that had a real problem with this situation. I mean, what do we make it? How do we explain that? Tom would always say, come on in, sit down. You know, he'd have me sit down. We'd talk. He'd get coffee or whatever. So between just this life of development, and for years afterwards, when I'd get out of school, when I was in college, I would take trips over to Atlanta. He'd moved to Atlanta at that point, and just to visit with Tom and just talk about life and talk about challenges and talk about relationships. And so this guy named Tom Ellis probably was one of the most significant mentors. I had others, but he was probably the key one. And just watching his style of life, his love for God, that just had a powerful and profound effect upon me. And others like him, you know, I hope still to this day. And I'm not doing too good on the latter part of that question.